Boldwood presents 10 Dates, written by Rachel Dove, and read by Fran Burgoyne and Max Dowler. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Alice. My eyelids are stuck shut. Did I sleep with my eyelashes on again? Damn it. Well, this is going to hurt. Not the most original thought she'd ever had, but it was the first conscious thought Alice remembered having after. When she played the moments over and over in her addled mind, searching for some clue that would make the whole chaotic mess fit together. That thought. And the smell. Cleaning products. Something sharper. Bleachy. The smell of it was thick in her nostrils, as though she was sitting shut-eyed in some kind of sterile space. Made her want to wrinkle her nose. The chemicals weren't the only thing she caught the whiff of. There was... What was it she could smell? It was familiar, in a way. She lay there, trying and failing to place it. Something else was there, in the air. It rose above the bleach stink, but it didn't overpower it. It carried a different energy to it. Something spicier. Muskier. That smell danced in her nostrils, but the origin eluded her entirely. When she'd first woken up, that was what her brain offered up. The first profound offerings her mind spat out at her. Hardly a reboot, was it? She tried to open her eyes, the action not even planned. It was just something her body did day after day, wasn't it? She couldn't think right now. Her brain felt woolly. She tried again, but everything was just too heavy. Her eyelids being one of those things. She couldn't get them to do her bidding. They were trying, though. She could feel her lashes being ripped out now and again. The odd tiny flash of pain when she tried to strain to see her surroundings. There was an annoying beep in the corner. It was methodical, robotic. As she tried to move her limbs, the beep got a little quicker. The space between beats shortening, more rapid fire. It was bloody annoying. Beep, 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 beep. She wanted to reach out and stop the sound, kill it. That would need arms, though. And if she couldn't lift a pair of eyelids, arms were just not going to happen, were they? She tried to speak, but her lips were like rubber. Her mouth felt so dry, like she'd licked the Sahara sand itself. Panic started to set in. There was something wrong. She felt trapped in her own body. Was that why her eyes wouldn't move too? Oh my God. What the hell was going on? Had she been kidnapped? Behind her closed eyes, she could make out a bright room. She could make out the light. It wasn't a dark dungeon, and she wasn't lying in some sack on a cold stone floor. She couldn't feel the lick of hellfire flames around her either, so that was something. She was in a bed, she knew. How had she gotten there, though? She tried to remember the last thing she'd done, the last place she'd been. She racked her brain, but all she got back were flashes of memory. Images she couldn't recall seeing before. Snippets of things she couldn't marry together. What the hell was going on? She tried to take a deep, steadying breath and felt a hand on her arm. Whoa, don't panic. The voice was deep, unmistakably male, gravelly, and full of concern. Nurse! He shouted that last word, and the sound rattled around in her brain like a bullet. She raised her hands to shush them. Or thought she did, at least. She felt pain instead. Her arms ached, and felt as though they'd just been stuck onto her body.
Sorry, baby. Don't panic, okay? I've got you. I'm here, babe. I'm here. Can I get some help in here now?
She heard the slam of a palm against the wall, a click. Another beeping noise started up behind her. This one was like a bloody siren, and the noise pierced her brain. Blurp, blurp, over and over. She tried to shush it, to move, but everything was too hard. She wasn't in control of her own body. She heard noises from further away. The bang of the door as hands pushed it, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes as feet surrounded her. The hand on her arm didn't move or make any attempt to pull away, even as she felt other hands on her. "Sir, please, let us work."
"Just tell me what's happening. Alice?"
"Mr. McClaren, calm down." Another stern female voice that time. She heard the male voice chunter something back, but she couldn't make it out. "Let the nurses work." Nurses? It clicked. She was in a bed, in a hospital. The heartbeat monitor beeped faster still.
"Alice, calm down."
The male voice again. Mr. McClaren. They'd called him that. For God's sake, why can't I open my eyes? Too bright, too scary. I need to look. Look. "Mr. McClaren, we will force you to leave if you continue." The hand never moved from hers. It squeezed a little tighter. "Don't let go," her brain screamed silently. "Listen, I've been here the whole time. You'd know that if you'd been here, and my damn name. I'm going nowhere." "I'll call security," the annoyed female voice half shouted back over the beeps and the movement of bodies. Alice was being prodded and poked, and people were talking to each other using medical terms she couldn't decipher. The gravelly voice fell off a cliff, its tone solid, dark.
"Try it. I fucking dare you."
The hand holding hers was ripped away. "No, stay with me, I'm scared."
"Get off me, man. Alice!"
The growl was desperate now. She had never heard her name sound so full of panic and pain before.
"Alice, I'm here. I'm not leaving."
"Dad?" Didn't sound like Dad. Or her brother, Lewis. He was softer spoken than most men. Her dad was deep, but it didn't register. He didn't growl like that. But that was the Mr. McClaren she'd first thought of. Two women were talking to the voice, and the other one was trying to get him to leave the room, but he was having none of it. She tried to reach out her hands towards him, feeling like she needed him to stay with her. She tried, and barely managed to lift it off the sheet. There was a commotion in the room, the man growling his refusal to leave. "Fine," she heard one of the nurses say. She felt a calloused palm clamp onto her hand. It engulfed it entirely, but it was soft too. She tried to look at the hand, to really see it there in hers. Dad's felt different to this, and she burned to finally see what the hell was going on. The lid on her right eye had started to lift, choosing now to finally cooperate. But all she saw were retreating fingers as they were being pulled away. Her own flexed towards their retreating form. She couldn't move. The nurses were still talking to her, and then she was coughing and gasping. The beeps were like a cacophony of sound assaulting her eardrums. She wanted it to stop. She wanted it gone. The noise was too much. She couldn't see, couldn't get her body to do what she needed it to do. The growling voice never stopped talking, telling her he was right here, would always be there. She could hear the deep voice shouting, but she couldn't feel him anymore. He sounded so different. She could feel the terror in his voice, could feel her brain getting darker again as events overwhelmed her. Before the lights went out, she heard a distinctive shout.
"Baby, don't leave me! Fight, Sparrow! Fight!"
Sparrow? What the hell does a sparrow have to do with me leaving? That was the last thought she had before she lost consciousness. Chapter 2. Alice. The beeping was there again, incessant, monotonous. She squinted one eye to see if her eyelid worked. It opened, but the bright light dazzled her. She tried to focus on something, anything to ground her. Her eyes stung, making them water. It was quiet now. The panic and the people were all gone. She listened for the voice again, but heard only muffled conversation far away. The other side of the door, she guessed. When her eyes finally adjusted, she realised it was night time now. She could see the moon right outside her window, big and full, as if someone had brought it there to show her that she was still on the planet. She looked at it for the longest time before she could bring herself to look away. The pain she felt when she tried to move wasn't making her want to rush. Everything felt sore, stiff. Something bad had happened. It didn't take a genius to work that out. But it was like her brain didn't want to think about it, or couldn't, which scared her more to contemplate. She felt movement, a squeak of something on the floor. She realised that there was someone else in the room. Through her peeking eye, she just about made out a blue shape next to the bed. Opening both eyes gingerly, and after a whole lot of blinking, she finally focused on the room around her. Her tired, stinging retinas revealed a man who was using a faded blue denim jacket as a blanket. Not the shape of her dad. Bigger. A lot bigger. His body filled the chair entirely, and then some. His face was crinkled up even in sleep. His head was turned away from her, a grizzly beard obscuring the rest of her side view. She tried to see who it was, but her eyelids were already dropping again with the effort of thinking about it. She lifted her left hand, a double cannula taped to the back of her wrist. She tried to lift her other arm, and stopped when she felt a stab of pain run up her limb. "Psh!" she grunted, and the man in the chair jumped up from his seat.
"Sparrow? Oh my God! Baby!"
"Ow!" She dropped her arm onto the bed without thinking, hissing when a fresh bolt of pain ran up it. Her whole body felt sore, alien to her. "Shh!" she tried to tell him, but the jacket was flung to the floor, and he was running out of the door shouting at the top of his bloody lungs. What the hell was he doing here anyway? It was a bit scruffy to be working there, surely. Dad. Dad was here, she remembered. Was it Dad? She felt fuzzy on the details. Did Dad send him here? Not Dad, she remembered. Different voice. Familiar, though. One way to find out. Dad? Aye, Chihuahua. That hurt. It felt like she'd banged her head against something hard, just from saying one word. It didn't even come out of her mouth properly. It was like coughing up dust, not a name she'd said all her life. Her throat. She remembered she was busted up, in a bed. She racked her brain. Facts. She needed facts. Why was she here? What the hell happened? What did she remember last? When you lost something, you always looked in the last place. That was the rule. She remembered something about the weather. Wet. She'd felt wet and cold. She shivered at the memory, pain letting her know it was there in about 50 different places. Jesus Christ. Her vision swam, and the beeping got faster. The bloody beeping. Over and over. Faster. Quicker. Her head banged with pain, like a drum that never stopped, with the bloody beeping like the insistent water out of a leaky tap. Like rain. It was raining, she remembered. Did she fall over? Hit her head? Hurt her arm trying to catch her fall? Didn't feel like it. Felt like she'd been hit by a damn truck. A big truck, filled with something heavy, like lead or bricks. None of your rice cake transporting tiny wagons. A real-life friggin' truck, filled with frozen Arctic rolls. Those things were like breeze blocks before you defrosted them. The door opened and the room started to fill with people again. Jesus, the noise! "Will you please be quiet?" She tried to half shout, but her throat was sore, cracked, craggy, with a couple of puffins' nests clinging to the sides, full of tourist fluff by the sounds of it. She was so parched. "Drink." Looking back at her were two doctors, one of them a grey-haired, official-looking man who was obviously some kind of consultant, and the other who was a rather nerdy-looking young man with large, horn-rimmed glasses on. They were far too big for his face, and she had to resist the urge to laugh. Not that she had the saliva spared to do that. She realised as her vision swam again that she might be on some kind of drug. Given that she had wires coming out of her like the creature from Stranger Things, it was a good guess. "Am I... drugs?" The senior fellow opened his mouth to speak, but was pushed from behind. Dear God. Her mother came running across the room, tearing up the second she saw her daughter lying in the bed. Well, I must be a mess. Her mother wasn't prone to drama. She was normally bloody stoic. Annoyingly, at times. She was definitely a glass-half-full type of person, but she was looking at her like a broken tumbler she couldn't stick back together. Alice felt a wave of relief when she first set eyes on her. Her mum was here. Things would be fine. Except the look on her mum's face. The beeping got a little faster. "Mum?" She tried to lick at her lips. Her mother tutted, and eyeing the doctor, she filled a tumbler with water from a jug that Alice hadn't seen before. It was sitting on a dresser that she hadn't clocked. The room was very different to what she'd expected. Not that she'd seen more than a chunk of bright light before. It didn't look like a typical hospital room. She was in a private side room, not a ward. She'd guessed as much already. It was full of crap, for one thing. Gaudy explosions of colour along the windowsill and surfaces that hurt her eyes almost as much as the bright lights. Once her mother had lifted the glass to her lips, she took a big drink through the straw sticking out of it. Her mother held it still, making her feel like a toddler. She was parched. It eased her poor throat and felt like she could finally speak. She turned to her mum, a million questions on her lips. Only one pushed itself from her mouth. It was the one that burned on her tongue the most. "What the hell is all this shit doing here? Am I someone else's room?" The two sentences had taken her an age to croak out, every other word a shadow of itself. She turned her gaze back to the doctors. "Did someone just die in here or something?" The doctors just looked at each other. There was stuff everywhere. Cards, a little cushion with a small brown bird on the front, chocolates in puke-inducingly cute packages, a fruit basket, more cards hung from a string on the far wall. The worst thing she'd seen, though, by far, was a soft toy gorilla. She hated gorillas with a bloody passion. Who the hell would send her that? That was when something clicked. The taxi. I was in an accident. A taxi. Now they were all just nodding at her. She didn't feel right. Did I die? She looked at her mum, but now she was crying like a loon. She couldn't get any sense out of her. Did I die? Am I dead? The doctors went to speak, but someone pushed forward into the room. The guy in the denim blanket. She recognised him from somewhere. The beard. It sat oddly on his face to her, looked strange. He didn't normally have a beard like that. She wasn't sure how she knew, but it was glaring. She knew him. His name was on the tip of her dry tongue. No, you didn't die, Alice. When he spoke again and said her name, it clicked. She knew exactly who it was. Gravelly voice, too. What did that remind me of? Last night. God, I wish my brain would work. You were hit by a drunk driver, going home after a night out in town. It was raining heavily and the other driver, he lost control. You didn't have your belt on. He looked angry. She could see movement by his side. When she looked, his fists were clenching and unclenching. She looked at her mother, but she was still crying. The nerd doc was talking to her in soft, hushed tones. She looked back at the man before her, and it clicked, bringing with it more confusion and a little lick of anger of her own. Why was he telling her this? She knew exactly who this guy was, and she didn't need to hear anything from him. She was still hopping mad at him. He'd been there, that night. She levelled her gaze at him. He kept jabbering on. Then she tuned back in. I'm so sorry. I wish I'd been there, with you. Why on earth would you want that? She looked aghast at him, pointing with a stiff arm to her injuries. Then you'd have been in here with me, wouldn't you? I'm still mad at you. Her hoarse voice was getting better, her anger helping her to push the words forth. She pointed a finger towards his face fuzz. Do you always skulk around hospital beds looking like a reject from Swiss Family Robinson? He didn't have a beard before. Was she losing her mind here? She felt like she was hallucinating on the drugs she was on. Ali. She kept going, cutting him off. What's with the face fuzz? You in witness protection or something? What is he doing here, being the spokesperson? Am I being pranked? My brain is not working at all. His head snapped back at her question, but she turned back to the doctors and dismissed him. Before she could even open her mouth, he was piping up again. It's me. It's Callum, Ali. She looked at him again, wondering why he was stating the obvious. It's me, babe. It's Callum. He rubbed at the monstrosity on his face. I haven't had time to shave for a while. She took him in again. He looked awful. His eyes were bloodshot. The bags underneath would cater for the Kardashians' next trip with ease. Faking a beard, though. It was a bit much. Was he incognito or something? She'd slapped his clean-shaven face only hours before. Right before she'd got into the taxi that would later crash. You really are an idiot. Take it off. I don't get why you're trying to make a joke right now. And where's Lewis? Did my stupid brother put you up to this?" She started to look towards the door, half expecting Lewis to pop out wearing a wig and a fake goatee. They were always pissing about when they were together, but she wasn't in the mood for this.
"Lewis is at work, Alice. He couldn't get cover or he'd be here. Michelle too. He didn't put me up to anything." "Take what off?"
"The fake beard. I'm in no mood for your jokes." He looked at the doctor, then down at himself. She turned back to the doc, ignoring him completely. "What happened? What's wrong with my body and my head?" For men who looked struck dumb, the two medical professionals were pretty animated by her question.
"Miss McClaren, you were involved in a road traffic accident. You were correct. You were in a taxi vehicle at the time. Now, we need to do some checks, of course, but I just want to ask you a couple of questions first. We'll explain everything, I promise." The room was quiet now. Her mother was looking straight at her as if she was a newborn baby. She must have given them a scare. She knew she was in bad shape. She could feel every little and large injury. She didn't even know what they were yet. Callum's face was what shocked her the most, though, other than the beard. He looked so upset. Maybe he'd realised he'd been an idiot that night. Maybe it was guilt, she thought rather petulantly. She giggled without meaning to, and noticed that only made Callum's expression worse. "Doc, is she okay?" His eyes slid from hers to the doctor in front of her, and she wanted to tell him to leave now. She wanted to be alone with the doctors. Looking at the faces of the people she knew and loved was freaking her out. What was Callum's deal, anyway? They didn't tend to hang out alone together. He was with his friends, namely her brother. She was with hers. They often just crossed paths that way. She was close with her brother and best friends with his fiancée Michelle, or Miggs as she was known to them. They'd grown up in the same neighbourhood. Miggs and Lou had gotten together in high school, stayed together ever since. They were a little gang, but hanging out just with Callum? They were what she'd describe as frenemies, mixed with a rivalry that often sparked fierce debates. Callum wasn't the first one she'd call for help. Him being there without Lewis or Michelle, it was weird. Everyone was acting strangely, she decided. Her mother had just hugged the nerdy doctor, she was sure of it. Callum was still looking at her. His facial hair blocked any attempt of working out what he was thinking, not that she considered herself an expert. She was still mad at him for trying to chat her up. And what had he said again, right before she'd slapped him? "I've always wanted you. I've been a coward for years, but I can't take it anymore. Go out with me, Allie. Please?" That was it. She'd remembered how earnest he'd looked, how sincere he'd been, even with half a bottle of Jack singing through his veins. He'd been weird all night, drinking more than he usually did, being all extra moody. Take what anymore? He wound her up, she wound him up. Coward for years, what did that even mean? He made himself sound like a star-crossed lover. Even if she occasionally did find him attractive, the girl crush she'd had on him had been secret and short-lived. Well, mostly. She'd learned to stuff it down quite well over the years. It was a bit like fancying a movie star. You could look, but the reality was, it was never going to happen. She'd forget about it. A product of misplaced horny teen hormones, she'd reasoned. She used to think he might like her, years ago, when Lewis and he had been friends at school, played football on the same team, but nothing ever came of it. He was one of her brother's friends, the annoying one. He seemed to enjoy winding her up most of the time. He always called her Allie, even though no one else did, and she liked it that way. Hearing it from his lips always made her feel odd.
but she'd stopped trying to correct him after the first 100 times he'd said it. Just seemed to stick. That night, though, he hadn't been joking. He'd seemed to be almost in pain trying to get his words out. It hadn't gone well, of course. She'd been too shocked and annoyed to give it any real consideration. Plus, she'd had 1 or 2 drinks herself by that point. She didn't trust her alcohol-lubricated tongue to do anything but tell him she wasn't interested. For one thing, Callum had never had a serious relationship, and even regular dating wasn't something he ever did. So, where was he going with this, she'd asked herself, before chewing him out and getting in that stupid bloody taxi. He tried to ask her again, she remembered now, his white knuckles gripping the top of her car door, trying to stay her exit. Then he'd tried to bloody kiss her. As if. She wasn't one of his groupies. God, she'd been so mad at him in that taxi. She remembered talking to the driver about him, how shocked she was. I remember feeling flattered too, she reminded herself. She knew her brain wasn't lying to her on that one. The point was, at the moment of impact, Alice had been doing nothing but thinking about Callum. Suddenly she needed him to go. She felt like she was suffocating with confusion. Him calling her baby and being all caring wasn't exactly helping. The beard was just the icing on the cake. Callum, I think you should... She was thwarted in her attempts to push him out of the room by the senior doctor taking a cautious step forward and breaking her line of sight to Callum, the bearded wonder. She saw him lean close to the other doctor, whispering something, and the other doctor nodded and left the room. She turned back to Callum to look at his face again. Just before she lost sight of him, she could see he'd been waiting for her to finish. Focused on her so intently she couldn't help but look back. The penetrating, sullen stare he usually sported wasn't there. He looked so... different. She couldn't tear her eyes away from him. The doctor's face swam back into view, and she realised she'd leaned forward a little to see the last bit of Callum's face. Yep, you definitely hit your head. He's irritating, remember? What are you gazing at him for? Concussions were weird things. The banging pain in her head was testament to the possibility. That was it. Having him declare his... whatever, it had shaken loose a knot of the old crush, that was all. The drugs were mingling everything together. Why she was still just looking at him didn't make sense, but she found she couldn't stop. Everyone else in the room blurred in her vision. She felt this weird... something. Aside from the faux facial hair, he didn't look the same. Maybe he just looked so different because he'd been worried he'd killed her off. Hence the fake beard, so he could hide his stupid shame. After all, she had spoken to him last night. Before this, he looked like a different bloke. He looked older somehow. Grizzled. Less pretty boy. Not that he really was. Not in a really bad way anyway before today, but... I want to ask you what year it is. Can you hear me, Alice? Shit. The doctor was talking to her, leaning in ever closer. She caught a whiff of coffee on his breath and tried hard not to gag. Her stomach felt weird. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything. Alice? Yeah? Shit, she'd done it again. Her mind was wandering off. I know the year. The doctor nodded once. What is it? 2020. Are you sure? Yes, it's 2020. Her mother gasped and Alice eyed her up. Mom? What's up? Nothing, dear. Her mother looked flustered and didn't speak again. Probably because her dad had just arrived, smiling at Alice. He was gripping her mother's arm so tight his fingers were turning purple. Callum came forward again. I've got a bad feeling. Starting to feel like I'm in some kind of weird nightmare. She tried to pinch her own thumb but couldn't do it. Her fingers were still weak, like thin little sausages strapped to her equally wobbly hands.
Babe, what year is it?
Why are you calling me babe? It's 2020, same as last time I answered. Next question, Doc. Callum came to sit at the side of her bed, and she tried to push him off when he reached for her arm. He frowned but kept his hand close. Next question, Doctor. Watching her, Callum placed one hand over the rail of her bed. She tried to flick his finger with hers, but she wasn't very strong. Her finger just pinged off his. He didn't move, but she saw his lip twitch. The parents were silent, still gripping each other. This was some kind of nightmare. She wiggled her toes and was relieved that she could feel them moving. She saw the covers move, just a little. She wasn't too bad then. She could walk. The rest she could cope with, she was sure. If everyone could just stop being so damn odd. Ask me.
What's the last thing you remember?
Being in a taxi? Being mad at Callum? She side-eyed him. He had his head in his hands, but his head snapped up as if he knew she was watching.
But, Alice, you weren't mad at me.
He muttered half to himself.
You were the opposite.
Oh, like I wasn't. She winced with the violence her words racked on her own body, but it was worth it. She was mad at him. Just because she was in this bed, it didn't change a thing. She felt like a cornered animal, and she knew just who to strike her claws at. You crossed the line. Callum's brows knitted together and he stared at her. He didn't take his eyes from hers. She scowled right back.
Ask her something else.
Callum's voice. The doctor did his little nod, and Alice noticed how tight his lips were before he asked her these questions. His shoulders were tense. Something was wrong. Badly wrong. Shit hitting the fan wrong.
Please.
Where do you live? Easy. 322 Merkin Avenue, Hebbleston. The doctor looked at Callum for confirmation and he nodded. And who do you live there with? I live alone. Callum did a strange kind of whimper. She glared at him. He was shaking his head at her. Callum, what is your problem? Why are you even here? This wasn't your fault. You didn't drunk drive into me. You can tell my brother he's a dick for even making you come here and miss work. She winced again as she tried to sit up. Oh, God, this fucking hurts. Can we just get on with this, please? She looked back at Callum and her statue-like parents. I just want to get on with this and get home. The doctor's lips all but disappeared. Alice, I need you to listen to what I'm about to say to you and try not to panic. He looked around at her monitors and back at her. You are stable now. Your recovery has been remarkable. But you are still coming off the effects of some heavy medication. Your body has suffered severe trauma. You have healed a lot. Remarkably well, in fact, while you were asleep. But your injuries were, I'm afraid, extensive. He paused, as if giving her time to take it in. But she already knew some of that. Her first inkling had been the fact that her body felt so destroyed, weak. She wasn't daft. She'd seen the faces of concern. She was the ruddy one with the injuries. And? She pressed. He eyed her parents and then Callum. They were all nodding at him like he was walking a plank and they were cheering him on, hoping for the best. Are you following me so far? Alice blinked rapidly. Yes, tell me. Dr. Berkovich pressed his lips together. You suffered fractures to both of your legs, and during the collision you also suffered 4 broken ribs, a broken arm, a dislocated shoulder, and a head injury. He paused again, and this time she needed that pause. She catalogued her injuries. She already knew both her legs had been damaged. She'd felt it when she'd wiggled her toes. She'd just not registered why, only that she was in bad shape. The head injury caused your brain to swell, and you arrived at the hospital unconscious. A few hours later, you fell into a coma. The neurological team monitored you with a sedation and intubation plan if you needed it. The coma helped to slow and eventually stop the swelling forming under the skull. You could breathe on your own, so we managed your pain, assessed and treated your other injuries. When you showed signs of consciousness, we lowered the sedation over the last couple of days, but it took you a while to wake up. A coma. Not just drowsy from the pain pills, then. She'd had an extra scary nap on the way here. A coma. How long have I been here? She looked at Callum's beard and her fear escalated. How long? She suddenly thought to ask out loud. How long was that death-skirting slumber? You woke up last night, but we'd been waiting a while. Callum cut in, a bleak edge to his voice. The doctor closed his eyes but didn't add anything else. Tell her, Doc. Tell me what? Alice, your coma was for over 2 months. You had your accident in December 2022. Another pause. Tell me what year it is again. Never before had 2 sentences ripped her world apart. But there they were. 2 months. She'd been in the hospital that long. 2022. December 2022. She looked up at the medication bag hung above her. It was half full and she tried to read the label. What is this? She pointed, her panic rising. She went to tug on the cannula, but Callum's hand was faster. Don't, Alice, it's okay. Okay! She tried again to pull the needles from her arm, but gave in when her fingers refused to help her escape. How the hell is any of this okay? 2 months! She felt a tear spill down her cheek. Really? She tried to stare the doctor down, as if sheer will could make him take the words back. He didn't. This can't be right, she said, looking around her for some kind of answer. You said my coma was for over 2 months, right? So it should be what? February 2021? She eyed the doctor, half wild and also proud of her maths skills. March, he nodded. You have been here for almost 11 weeks. She tried to make the dates fit, make sense of what she knew. March. But it was December 2020. I'd been out at a party. I was with all of you lot celebrating Lewis and Mig's engagement. She saw her dad shake his head and carried on. I spoke to Callum, got a taxi home. Ended up in here. That was 2020. The doctor nodded grimly. We will have to do more tests, but we did fear this.
Brain injuries are difficult conditions to predict, Miss McClaren. It appears some memory loss has occurred. We will know more after the tests.
So, I lost what? 2 years? He nodded slowly, his eyes wrinkling with warmth in the corners.
It would appear so, but it's early days. I know this is difficult, distressing, but try to focus on what we do know. You are healthy and recovering. You suffered quite a traumatic event.
All she could do was nod, but inside she was frantically running around inside her brain, pulling out drawers and looking under rugs for some kind of memory that would spark something in her. All she could remember was Callum asking her out, her leaving into the night in the back of that car. What happened to the drunk driver? She suddenly thought of the others involved.
The police are dealing with him, Callum half grunted. Your driver was okay. He's going back home.
Good, she nodded, dazed by everything they were telling her. It's just me that's screwed then. She laughed, but it was hollow. Where's Lewis again?
Stuck at work. He's going to come as soon as he can. Meg sends her love.
Oh, okay. Well, She didn't know what she was. She couldn't take it all in. She needed to digest it all. Scream into a pillow, maybe. Callum ran his fingers along the back of her hand, and she pulled it away. You must need to get back to work too. She threw him a deflated-feeling half-smile. Thanks for coming. Sorry I snapped. Callum's face dropped.
You want me to go?
He sounded gutted. She needed him to go, though. His hand had felt nice in that moment. He was being so kind, was adding to her confusion tenfold.
Alice, I can't. You need to listen to what we're saying. I can't leave.
His jaw flexed beneath the bush.
I won't.
That's right, her mother said, suddenly rushing forward. He can't leave. What's wrong with her, doctor? She's not right. Mother! Alice made sure to call her mother, to tell her in no uncertain terms that she was pissing her right off, a remnant of a code from her teens that had stuck. Her mum narrowed her eyes instead of backing off. Don't you mother me. My dear, it's March 2023. The 27th of March, 2023. You were in an accident in December 2022. You were in a taxi coming back from a night out with the others, but you were going back home to meet Callum. He'd been working late and had to miss it. She looked away then, her determined features flashing a touch of vulnerability before she went on. You were badly hurt. Your head. Oh, your head. Your heart stopped. She saw Callum's fist clench again. My heart what? Mrs. Dr. Berkovich tried to cut in. She shut him down with a mother's stern look. She needs to know. She's my daughter. I know what she's like. She's always been so independent. She sniffed. She's a tough cookie, my Alice, but she's a problem solver. She'll worry at this until she knows every little detail. She was snarling at the doctor. When she looked back to face her youngest child, she was the picture of maternal kindness. She licked at her lips. I'm sorry, darling. But here it is. And remember,
You are here now. With us.
Alice nodded slowly. Tell me. You're right. She flicked her gaze to Callum. I need to know everything. Her mother smiled, taking a slow, even breath.
It was a bad crash. The other driver was going too fast, even before he hit the black ice. You were hurt the most. He slammed right into your door.
Her voice broke just for a second, but Alice watched her mother take a deep breath, her voice stronger when she spoke again.
Your heart stopped in the ambulance. They blue-lighted you all the way. People all came to help you. Called for help.
She smiled, but it was watery.
Everyone's been so kind.
She dabbed a tear away from her cheek, cleared her throat.
There was a lot of trauma to your body from the crash. You were in a coma for just shy of 3 months, like the doctor said. They warned us that there might be some damage, that you might not ever wake up. But I knew you'd fight it. I knew it.
Her mother's voice broke down completely, and she sobbed into her father's shoulder.
Damage.
That was the one word that sent a chill through her. She knew she was high on drugs and had a head injury. She'd been semi-amused up to a point. But now reality was sinking in, seeing her mother so broken. It sounded bad. She wished she could remember. Anything. Even the crash. Anything to help her make some sense of this. No matter what she probed at, it was like dead space. A void. Worse than a void. Non-existent. My memory. That's it, right? You weren't joking. It's real. Isn't it? Their faces said it all. She heard Callum grunt a yes under his breath. Her mother smiled, as if she'd won a prize.
Yes, she's getting it.
She turned and stabbed a finger in the direction of the doctor.
See? I told you she was smart.
She's the smartest.
This is going to drive her crazy.
A gravelly voice from the side of her sighed heavily. And just like that, her anger rose above everything else swirling around. Callum, why are you still here?
I'm here for you. Listen to your mum, Alice. This is real. God, I wish I'd not worked late that night. We never went out without each other normally. We didn't want to.
He grinned, but it faded fast.
You were coming to see me in that taxi. We were on the phone at the time.
No. She was already shaking her head. That's not what I remember. He looked nonplussed for a second, then his legendary steel jaw clenched tight. She used to wonder why he always seemed to clench it so much. She wondered if he had an uncontrollable twitch. She'd watched him when he was with her brother, though. No twitch. Just seemed to be around her. Weird.
That's what I'm trying to say, baby.
Baby. There it was again. Her addled brain chose to focus on that. He was saying things she didn't understand, didn't want to comprehend. She could only process one emotion at a time. She chose anger, and she levelled it right at Callum. That's not what I remember. I don't know why I'd have been coming to see you. I remember leaving you, getting into the taxi. He looked at the people standing near the bed and she felt stupid, like she was failing some test she didn't get a chance to revise for. And as for that night, I don't get why you even tried it on with me anyway. You look like you want to tell me to go away half the time, which is why I feel fine about asking you to leave now. Go back to work. I know you have that big contract on the industrial estate, right?
You're focusing on that now. I don't give a stuff about my business. That contract was in 2020. I didn't try it on with you that night. I don't get what you mean. Do you remember anything about us?
I remember your "I don't want to be a coward" speech. You said that. It's annoying that you're denying it.
When? Just now? Baby, I wasn't...
I asked you to leave. She turned to her father, who was right in the back of the room. Dad, tell Callum to bugger off. She looked back at him triumphantly. You did try it on. I told you to jog on and got into the taxi. Here I am. Not your fault.
The night I first asked you out.
He said it slowly, as if he didn't want to ask her in the first place. She nodded, very slowly, back. Yes, Callum. The same night. The night of the accident. Her voice petered out. But... She tried to collect her thoughts. That was in 2020, so... Jesus, her brain really was like a wet noodle. Callum's face fell.
Oh my God. That was the damn night you remember. The last thing. The night we fell out after the engagement party.
Yes. The night you whispered slobbering nothings in my ear, tried to kiss me, and then declared your undying love. Yeah, last night. She frowned. Or maybe 3 months ago last night. Or 2 years and 3 months ago. I don't know. Her mother laughed hysterically. It sounded like a hyena had walked into the room.
I think she's in shock, her dad announced to the room. She did that when I told her my mother had died.
Oh God, what are we going to do? Her mother mouthed her words to Alice like she was a toddler, over-enunciating every syllable. You're a bit confused, darling. It's March 2023. 2023. We came second in the Eurovision. The women won the Euros. That's good, isn't it? It's not good, Mum. None of this is good. Ow! For God's sake! She'd punched the bed rail, or tried to. Anything to stop her emotions from taking over her completely. She was in a cold sweat, trying to make sense of things in her head that were just not there.
Language, my girl, her otherwise seemingly mute dad chimed in. The man upstairs brought you back. Be nice.
Callum's hands were around her injured one in seconds. She didn't brush him off this time. He was gentle, soft. He didn't crush her in his big meat hooks, at least. She let her hand just lie there, sitting in his. She felt his warmth. Something within her calmed down, just a little. She noticed a ring on his wedding finger. It was chunky, like his hand. Silver, with a little bird etched in black on the surface. Not something she'd ever seen him wear before. Wasn't a man's usual trinket. Cute ring, she pushed out before thinking. The drugs combined with the day were making her feel odd, unfiltered. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he looked from her to it.
Thanks. It was a gift.
From one of your chicks, she pouted, a little scowl crossing her features that she'd spoken it out loud.
Good comeback, though. Yes, brain. Still got it. You saw the bird, delivered the zinger. It's not all lost, then. I've kept my sarcasm, too. Small mercies.
No. He cut through her thoughts. He was twirling the ring around on his finger. I don't have chicks. Something about his expression made her bite back another retort. Bet it was from one of his hangers-on. He always had the attention of women, wherever they went, like flies around the proverbial pile. He never seemed to notice like she did. Stupid ring. She hated it. I hope it turns his finger green. She noticed both her parents were now huddled in the corner, talking with the doctor. Her father caught her looking, gave her the most awkward double thumbs up she had ever seen, and returned right back to the huddle. She looked away. Unfortunately, her only comfortable position meant she was left looking straight at Callum. She realised he was still holding her hand, and she tried to pull away. Callum, I really think you should be going now. My parents will be going soon. She had no idea what time it was, but she felt like she'd woken up from a long daytime nap. Woozy. A bit wonky. 2023.